5 seconds to the open. You ready?
Who wants to get this thing started right about now?
Welcome to Follow the Money Weekly with your host, Jerry Robinson.
Welcome.
Not just some guru.
Oh, really?
Your host is an economist and a best-selling author.
What an interesting news item. I'd better write that down.
And just someone who likes to make money and help you to make money. Welcome to Follow the Money Weekly. And here he is, Jerry Robinson.
Friends, welcome to the only radio broadcast dedicated to bringing you more truth packed into 1 hour than the mainstream media gives you all week long. You have found it. You're listening to Follow the Money Weekly Radio on the web at www.ftmdaily.com. Also broadcasting on iTunes, Stitcher, TuneIn.com, all over the web. We can be found. You can also download through our RSS feed right there at our website, ftmdaily.com. We do get a lot of calls from people saying, hey, can I listen to your show in my local market? And there are some renegade stations that have picked up our show and are playing it locally. But for the most part, people find that it's very easy to download our program and listen to it on the way to work, or perhaps listen to it on the way home from work, or maybe exercising. We do get a lot of comments from people who tell us that they download the program and listen to it on their MP3 player or whatever the case might be.
Right, and if you are using a mobile device or an iPad, this neat app called Stitcher, you don't even have to download the show. You just click on the app, you search Follow the Money Weekly, and you can add it to your favorites so you don't have to search each time, and it just streams right there on your app, and you can find lots of different radio shows and podcasts on Stitcher, so that's kind of a neat app.
Yeah, we've been really impressed with that. Well, there's a lot of news that occurred this week, and we're going to dive into that here momentarily. We got some really good things for you coming up on today's show. First of all, we have Bill Gertz from the Washington Times. He's a reporter. He's also the editor of the Washington Free Beacon, which is something that I have turned to often for news. He has written 6 books. He's going to be coming on and talking about something that we don't think about too often, or maybe you've never even heard of it, is the fact that China is developing one of the largest drone programs in the world. In fact, it's the world's fastest growing drone program, and they are getting pretty aggressive about it. It's concerning Japan, it's concerning Taiwan, it's concerning the Philippines and several other countries in the area in that region. And so we're going to bring on Bill Gertz. He's going to talk to us about what all this means. Also, we're going to begin the program right now with some interesting information about Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now I just said all those 5 nations, and they make up what are known as the BRICS nations. You've probably seen them before, called BRIC, B-R-I-C.
Yeah, that's right, because South Africa was just included in these group of nations back in 2010. So now it's called BRICS with an S. South Africa.
Yeah, they've added them in. And there was quite a bit of stir this week, and it has a lot to do with the petrodollar system. I told Jennifer, I said, as soon as I saw all this news breaking, I said, we have to talk about this on the show this weekend, because everything we've talked about with the petrodollar system and the concern about the U.S. dollar playing a subordinate role in the global economy, well, that's not here yet, but we are quickly setting up the infrastructure for that. We're moving quickly towards the time whenever this whole concept that has been in place, this old economic order that came about according to the Bretton Woods Conference in the post-World War II era, this has been a boon to the United States. Our economy, our stock markets, our asset values, everything. Our economy has soared. But remember, back in the 1910s, for example, or the 1920s, it was not the U.S. that was, the primary government in the world and the economy. It was Britain. The great British Empire was the empire that the sun never sat on. And, it was certainly a very, very slow demise of that empire. But by the 40s, the United States had fully conquered the global economy.
That's right. And now many experts would say, China, Brazil, these BRICS nations are saying, wait just a second. This economy, this global financial order it's history. It was set up back in the 1940s, and we are ready for something new, something that diminishes or reduces the power hold that the West, the U.S., and Europe has on the financial order in the world. And so there's lots of news out of a summit that these 5 nations held in South Africa this week. They were actually there in a place called Durban, South Africa on Wednesday, and they have some news coming out of that meeting.
Yeah, there was quite a bit of stuff that came out, and I know the mainstream press was spending a lot of time talking about Cyprus, and by no means do I want to downplay the significance of Cyprus. We're not going to talk about that too much today on today's program, except to say we did talk about it quite a bit back on our conference call. We talked a little bit about it on our FTM Insider area. I've been providing my thoughts. But overall, I would say the takeaway from Cyprus is be careful with your money in the bank. Now, I'm not saying that the United States is going to experience a similar run anytime soon. However, the Eurozone chief has already come out in Europe and has already said, one of the Eurozone chiefs over there said, Spain, Italy, Portugal, you're next. Get ready. So we could see this spread throughout the Eurozone, and I don't think there's any doubt about that. We'll talk with Tom Cloud a little more about that later on and how this is all playing out with gold. But back to what Jennifer was saying about the BRICS nations, and they met in Durban, South Africa this week. Well, these nations, Brazil, Russia, China, India, they have really been after the IMF and the World Bank to become more friendly to the periphery nations. There's just been this kind of idea in Washington that there's the West and then there's the rest. And China and Russia, India and Brazil, and now, of course, South Africa are saying, wait a minute, as Jennifer was saying, that's not right. We don't live in the 1940s anymore. We live in a very different time. So we want a new economic order. And so what are they doing? Well, let me take you back real quickly to what happened. First of all, we had the brand new Chinese president leave China, and he went to Moscow and signed about 30 different agreements with Vladimir Putin, the Russian president. Most of these agreements were surrounding oil and natural gas, and you have to remember that China and Russia have a very tense relationship because they're very suspicious of each other. They're not exactly sure what the other one is up to. Also, they share a border that makes Russia very nervous because the Chinese people are very, dense, a very dense population. And of course, compared to the sparse population of far eastern Russia, which joins the border of China, there's some concern about what China's motives might be with any kind of deals with Russia. So there has been a lot of suspicion there and still remains. Nevertheless, they were able to work out their differences. The Chinese president made it his very first trip. They signed deals. They shook hands. They, got in front of the camera. The idea that was being portrayed was China and Russia are working hand in hand. The next thing that the Chinese president did is he got on a plane and flew down to Africa. Now, Africa and China have a unique relationship. China has been courting that continent. They have been attempting to exploit many of the resources that are in that area. And, of course, the United States has moved in through AFRICOM. They have moved in military forces attempting to show and display power. But the Chinese are there underneath economic auspices. So there is not a military presence in Africa the way that we may see in the future, because it will be a primary spot for resource wars as we go forward. Again, it's one of the last untapped areas of the world. And so we will see resource wars in Africa. But now, all of that being said, while the Chinese president was there, they met in Durban, South Africa, and all 5 nations came together for their annual summit. This is the very first time after 5 years of meeting that they actually emerged with an institution that they want to create, and it is called the BRICS Development Bank. This idea of all 5 of these countries creating a development bank that would thwart and that would compete with the World Bank and with in some ways, the IMF. They're going to have their own foreign exchange pool that they'll be using as well to compete with the IMF. But really, many of these countries have to rely upon Western money, Western banks, and then, of course, they pay the West interest on that money that they borrow. And, of course, many times that money comes with, lots of strings attached. And so what these countries are saying is, look, we are not going to wait for the IMF and for the World Bank to finally open their eyes to the fact that it's 2013. We are going to create our own bank. We're going to put seed money in it ourselves, and we're going to begin loaning to each other and to other countries in the region.
Right. And basically, one of the Chinese state-run news agencies came out and said these 5 nations, are going to need about $4.5 trillion in infrastructure investment over the next 5 years. And clearly, none of those 5 countries, none of their currencies is called the U.S. dollar. So why would they need to go to a U.S. dollar currency whenever they can just set something up amongst themselves? Jerry, do you think that in light of this news coming out, I don't think this bank will be up and running in the next several years. In fact, many of the news stories are saying that out of the meeting, the different leaders have admitted that the bank wouldn't be up and running and operational for a number of years. But what are your thoughts as far as, is this going to challenge the U.S. dollar? Is it going to make the Chinese yuan? Because clearly China is the biggest economy in this group. And so they're pushing for their currency to have a bigger status in the world financial realm. Is it going to challenge the U.S. dollar with this announcement as far as the reserve currency? Yeah,
eventually, but not anytime soon. And the World Bank is not under any kind of threat at all right now. I mean, they are firmly established as the bank of banks on the globe. They are going to be the bank that countries continue to borrow from. The BRICS Development Bank will require some time, as you're talking about. And, it's also possible that this was an attempt, and we don't know exactly, but this could be an attempt by the BRICS nations to put massive pressure on the World Bank and IMF to make reforms. It's possible that they are wanting to see reforms made at the World Bank and IMF, and they're going to just go ahead and push the envelope through this announcement. Another announcement that was made also was China and Brazil signed a $30 billion currency swap deal, in essence changing the arrangement that they have, which means that they're going to be using their own currencies instead of the dollar, and that's about half of their trade. They're taking it out of the dollar, and so therefore not settling into the dollar means that they have a lesser demand for the dollar. And remember, the demand for the dollar is what drives the value of the dollar, right? It drives the supply of the dollar. So if you have countries around the world who begin to pull the plug on the dollar, and they say, look, we don't mind using it, but when we deal with this particular country, we're going to use our own currency. You get that happening enough times in enough currency arrangements and currency swap deals that are made around the globe, suddenly the dollar begins to lose its luster. And that really begins to put pressure on the dollar and, of course, upward pressure on everything that the dollar buys.
Right. And I was reading a lot of the news stories coming out of this summit, and one of them said that China already has similar agreements like this one with Argentina and Australia, and in fact are pursuing other agreements similar with the UK, Hong Kong, and Japan. And so, as you said, the more these type of agreements come into play, the less settling in the U.S. dollar, the more downward pressure that will be put on the dollar.
Yeah, and it should be noted, I mean, these trade agreements really have some teeth. When you look at trade between China and Brazil in recent years, it's exploded. I mean, if you go back to 2003, the two countries their trade made up about $6 to $7 billion per year. But you fast forward to 2012, that number had exploded up to about $75 billion per year. So China has replaced the U.S. as Brazil's main trading partner. We're seeing a lot of seismic changes, and I know it's difficult for all of us to realize that. When people were living in the time of the declining British Empire, In fact, if you go back and you read some of the history, read some of the news stories that were going on, many of the British public and British commentators and the British intellects were saying, oh no, it's going to be decades and decades before America is able to rise. I mean, they're just a bunch of ragtag people. And so the British Empire was deluded. They were deluded and they were deceived because they thought themselves to be the top of the food chain forever. And remember, no nation stays on top forever. And the United States has been there for a while, and it has made a lot of enemies. It's made a lot of enemies because it's dropped a lot of bombs. It's been very aggressive. And it's also just a form of government is not liked by many of the countries that are out there. They don't prefer to run their countries that way, and they don't want the U.S. influencing their people. So there's just a lot of animosity around the globe, as you well know. But the dollar itself, as we see this, we do see again, this is another nail in the coffin as these countries, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, and I should also throw in Indonesia. Indonesia should be in there. In fact, there's a case to be made to call it the BRICS. Throw on an extra I at the very end because Indonesia is the fastest growing nation by far in Southeastern Asia. In fact, it's one of our favorite ETFs, IDX, IDXJ. Those are some great plays on a rising Asia because Indonesia is just so fast growing. But these nations, they truly represent the future. This is where the future population is. It is where the future ideas are. It's where the young people are. I mean, you cannot escape it. Europe is dying. The West is bankrupt. And when we look at these other nations across the world, across the Pacific, we see them rising. And the U.S. knows it. That's why the Obama administration has pivoted towards the Pacific theater. They're stationed in Guam and they're stationed in Hawaii, and they're trying to put pressure upon the Chinese to come into line. They're not accomplishing their goal. In fact, I'm going to bring on my good friend Bill Gertz. He's a Washington Times reporter. He's going to tell us a little bit about something else that we may not know about China. Let's go to that right now. Well, we hear a lot about drones in the U.S. press and in the media. We hear a lot about how the federal government wants to see about 10,000 drones flying over the skies by 2020. One of the things we don't hear about too often is the fact that China is also pursuing drone capabilities. Joining me on the phone today is Bill Gertz. He is a columnist and reporter for the Washington Times. He's written 6 books, writes a weekly column on the Pentagon and national security called Inside the Ring, and he's also the editor of the Washington Free Beacon. Bill, it's great to have you on the program.
Hi, good to be with you.
Let's dive in here. I do want to talk about drones. You wrote a great piece here called Game of Drones, China Stepping Up Drone Deployment in the Washington Free Beacon, which I do turn to for news often. Tell me, you've been talking about China for a long time. What is, from your experience, what do Americans not fully understand about China and what it's doing right now?
Well, I think put simply, there's a lack of understanding that despite all the revolutionary economic changes that have taken place in China, that Beijing continues to be ruled by a nuclear-armed communist dictatorship. They're not a normal nation, and they have interests that are definitely different than ours and opposed to ours. And I see this in their support for Iran, their support for North Korea, and at the same time they pretend to be friendly toward the United States. And there's been a fundamental misunderstanding about the character of the system over there. They've changed their economic system, no question about it. But the political system remains fundamentally a Soviet-style dictatorship. And now that they've kind of abandoned Marxist-Leninist ideology, at least publicly, their military, if you go to the military museum there, you'll see statues of Marx, Lenin, Engels, and Stalin even. They are still pretty much in the Soviet mode, and they're kind of shifting to nationalism now, which is making them kind of a new fascist state.
Interesting. Now, they are developing drone capabilities. In fact, they have, according to your report, just under 300 drones as of whenever this study was done. But tell us about China's drones. What are they doing?
Yeah, this is part of the military's buildup, and they're developing all kinds of asymmetric capabilities, and including armed drones. They've had some drone technology for a while. Most of it has been stolen from the U.S. as part of the massive cyber espionage that's been underway for over a decade. But if you look at some of the pictures of these drones that they've developed, they're almost identical to U.S. systems. And of course, even their aircraft, their military aircraft, are similar in design. So they've basically copied the designs. They've gotten a lot of help from the Russians as well. But they have two new drones in particular. One is called the Yilong, and the other is called the CH-4, and these are armed drones that like Predators that have missiles. In addition to that, they're building a large unmanned jet, which is kind of a bat-wing jet that's very similar to what the U.S. is doing. And the thinking is that this has enough capability to reach targets in as far away as Guam, which is about 2,000 miles from the Chinese coast. But U.S. intelligence is closely watching this, and it appears to the people I talk to fairly concerned about this kind of military development.
Yeah, and Russia, you mentioned earlier, they also have drones. How aggressive are they? They're pretty antiquated, aren't they?
Well, yeah, we just saw last week the Chinese president went to visit Moscow and met with Vladimir Putin, and Putin has kind of taken on, he's trying to restore the old Soviet Union, and so he's taken a much harder edge toward the U.S., and we saw both the Chinese and Russian leaders come out opposing U.S. missile defenses. Now, you have to wonder what's going on there. Missile defenses are defenses. They're not offensive weapons, and yet because they can counter their offensive ballistic missiles, the Chinese and Russians are getting together to oppose our efforts to protect ourselves. I think that's a very telling indication.
Whenever you see the barking dog in North Korea just constantly gnawing at the heels of the United States, do you believe that that is purely North Korea, or do you believe that is China working through the proxy of North Korea?
Well, they're very close, North Korea and China, especially the militaries. And China's been playing a double game on North Korea for years. In one sense, they try to appear as if they're cooperating with the United States and the UN to sanction North Korea for its missile tests and nuclear tests. But behind the scenes, the Chinese and North Korean militaries are as close as, the Chinese like to say, as close as lips and teeth. And all Chinese leaders, before they become the top party leader, they always travel to Pyongyang, the North Korean capital, to express their ideological solidarity with that communist regime. So it's a real problem, and it won't be solved until the Chinese can step in and pressure that regime. They haven't done that. Despite sanctions, they're continuing to provide North Korea with the oil that it needs. All the trade and goods comes from China. So this idea that the Chinese are somehow cooperating with Japan, South Korea, and the United States is false.
Interesting. Now, you've been a forerunner on this. You've been talking about China for some time, and I do want to bring up this pivot that we see in the West towards China. What are your thoughts on it? And my question really is, what is Washington's end game in moving into the Pacific, and do you think they will succeed?
Well, I've written extensively about this. The military really, there's been a big debate within the Pentagon over how to deal with China. And there's these pro-China elements who want to treat China as just a normal nation like any other nation, and others who say, no, wait a minute, we've got to start building up our forces now to be able to deter them. Otherwise, they're going to use their military for coercive diplomacy and turn the Pacific into a Chinese lake where everyone has to bow down and kowtow to Beijing. So there's been this fight going on for a while. They developed a new concept at the Pentagon called the air-sea battle, which is a way to organize our Navy and Air Force to better deal with the threats from China. But they had to, because of the pro-China policymakers, they had to say that it wasn't targeted on China, which undermined its ability. The other thing is the government's basically bankrupt now. We're looking at huge cuts we've already had over the last 4 years, and now another 600 in defense. Unless there's a dedicated budget to the Pacific pivot, it's really not going to last. And I've heard some officials tell me that the Obama administration would like to get rid of the whole concept of the Asia pivot, claiming it's too expensive and will upset the Chinese. They want to have more appeasement-oriented policies toward China.
A final question, Bill. I know you got to run. I know you're busy. Let's talk about this final question, and that is, Are we moving into a war? The average person who's watching a lot of this stuff on TV, they see China, they see Russia getting together, they see the BRICS Bank, they're talking about breaking the dollar, they're talking about, North Korea. We see a lot of alliance with them in Iran. American people are confused. The ones who are paying attention are wondering, are we heading towards a war? What does your expertise tell you?
Well, I don't see a hot war. I definitely see a cold war, and I think that's already well underway if we just look at the Chinese cyber attacks that only in recent weeks have gotten the kind of attention that I've been trying to focus on them over the last several years. China has been engaged in cyber warfare against the U.S. I mean, stealing technology and secrets, but more nefariously, they've actually planted nefarious software in various computers that they've broken into that's almost undetectable, and they can use that in a crisis to shut down networks. So they're positioning themselves. They call it cyber reconnaissance. They're positioning themselves for a future confrontation with the U.S., and we see that taking place with the Chinese pressure on Japan over the Senkaku Islands. All the Southeast Asian nations are in disputes with China over their hegemony in that region. So the real solution I've always advocated is for China to become more democratic. Do they need to be a U.S.-style democracy? No, but they need some type of democracy that can better support their pseudo-capitalist system. And unless they do that, we're headed for big trouble.
Expert insights from our guest and reporter for the Washington Times and also the editor over at Washington Free Beacon, Bill Gertz. Bill, how can they get a hold of you? How can they pick up your books if they want to get a hold of you?
I have a website. It's called The Gertz File. It's GERTZFILE.com.
Great. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Follow the Money Weekly presents your precious metals market update. Here's Tom Cloud.
Well, Jerry, it's been a little different week with the extension of the debt ceiling not being voted on Wednesday the 27th when the government was supposed to be out of business.
Yeah, what a wild ride for investors with all the things that have been happening. What's been happening on your phone? What kind of questions are you getting this week, and what's the concern about gold and silver going forward?
Well, I tell you, as we've talked about, the large investor is moving money out of the banking system. They've looked at Cyprus, and we really believe Cyprus is a test to move to bigger countries with this banking situation. The banking situation cannot go on the way it is. There's too much debt there. There's not enough money, real money, back what's in the banks. Reserves are way down. And we really believe this is a test to see before they move to bigger countries about it. So larger investors are very concerned about the FDIC that has about 3 or 4% assets to cover what they have insured, and they're really worried that there's such a small percentage of real currency in circulation compared to bank entry currency. So that's been all this week and last week has been big money moving out of bank deposits.
Yeah, it's interesting to see. I know Utah had taken this track a couple of years back when they actually ruled and made a law that gold and silver coinage were actually legal tender in that state. And now it looks like Arizona is following behind them. What do you think is going to happen out there? You think we're going to see that happen?
Yeah, I do, Jim. I think it's going to take a while to implement everything. We've seen them try because if you think about it, if I went in to a grocery store and I had a card that had 4 ounces of gold on it, say $6,500, you go in and buy $60 worth of groceries, you got to have a bank to hold that gold and a system to kind of like having a card, like a phone card where you have a balance on it. And all that's got to be worked out and perfected. But here's the good news, is one state figures it out, how to do all that, whether it's Utah or Idaho or any of them, there's about 4 or 5 of them, then, this thing's going to really pick up speed and probably move around the country. But until then, it's just getting the legislation passed and ready for the system, but we're still not ready for the system to be implemented at this time.
Okay, so what's going on with all the doomsayers on gold and silver? As we look out in the investing landscape, we see quite a few bears popping up, some banks even saying that gold's going to go down to $1,350, $1,375 by the end of the year. Others predicting even further down to $1,000 per ounce by the end of the year. What's driving this sentiment? And is it genuine? Are there real fundamentals behind these calls?
I don't see it, Jerry, where I see it. I mean, I know today the figures just came out on the central bank purchasing for last month, and we saw, I never can pronounce it, Azerbaijan and Mongolia and Kazakhstan, just those little countries purchased 7.5 tons of gold in February of this year. The figure's just out, and now we've seen something like 61 straight months where central bank purchasing is going up, not down. There's not a central bank selling an ounce of gold, and that's what my big investors say. Why I want to have my money where the central banks have their money. They're putting it into gold very quietly. And as I told you earlier today in a private conversation, you know, our sales are down about 35 orders a week, but our volume is up this year. But it's just the small investor doesn't know what to do because they are reading these doomsday reports, and they don't have a lot of free money to take a chance on. And I understand that. I'm not knocking that. I'm just telling you that's one of the things we've seen this year. But it's just the opposite for the people. We have banks buying. We have large institutions buying. We have money managers recommending higher percentages. Right at the time you're reading all of this. But those people are interested in safety. They're interested in preserving what they've worked their life for. They're not worried whether it goes up 3% or 17% that has averaged the last 12 years. They want out of the paper debacle where there's absolutely nothing there that holds that up except confidence. And once we see the bond market crack, which we're getting very close, according to the Ayton sisters, who are great prognosticators, you know, when that money starts moving out of bonds and the principal on bonds starts going down, then part of that money is going to come to gold. What percentage, I don't know. It doesn't make any difference. But you'll see gold go up to its real value right now, which should be in the 1950 range, according to our calculations, where gold should be right now based on the amount of money that's been created the last 3 years out of thin air. Most of it's been going into the stock market and pushing it up. And once again, I think a bigger bubble's being created there than gold. Certainly everybody's got their own opinion on that.
Yeah, and Market Watch put out a really good piece a couple of days ago called The Case for Staying in Gold. And they really pointed out how many of the smaller retail investors are simply chasing momentum right now. And, of course, gold has not been in a momentous phase in an upward position. So in many cases, many people are simply biding their time, holding on to gold, and viewing it properly, not as a can't-miss investment, but more of crisis insurance. If we ever needed crisis insurance, now's the time.
Well, you really do. I mean, if you didn't get a wake-up call, and I'll send out some great email blasts the last few days about the Cyprus thing written by a billionaire, Rick Rule, I've known for 30 years. He's been Gresk over in Switzerland. And you see, I mean, these are billionaires that know what's going on. I mean, people read this. I don't know how you read these things and not get the picture of it, but certainly I know I don't want any more in the bank than I give my wife to run our household each month. Rest of it I take out, and if I don't put it into metals, I put it into something else like diamonds, or sometimes you can get by other foreign currencies and just pile up Swiss francs. So, I mean, you've got to have your plan and go with it. That's not, but at some point, you know, this is going to come to the United States. There's no question about it. We're the worst money managers of anybody. We just are so much bigger and can just keep printing the money. They can keep it off longer. But the next thing we're going to see is higher inflation and higher rates on bonds, which is going to make the bond principal go down. And that is going to happen, and probably this year.
What about palladium and platinum? Those have been diverging as of late. It looks like palladium's just holding up very well, and platinum's just kind of struggling the last few days. What do you make of those two metals? Well,
I still think you kind of have to talk about them together, even though palladium's in the $760 range, $760 an ounce, and platinum's in the $1,560. It's $800 an ounce higher, but still they're used for a lot of the same things. But the shortage that physically is developed and the way the middle class is buying cars in India and China, and the 8 new car facilities, plants in China is showing demand picking up on that. And as we talked about earlier today also, we're talking about an OPEC type thing with Russia and China getting together, and South Africa that mine most of the platinum and palladium, and kind of having a cartel type situation like OPEC or what we saw with diamonds and De Beers. And certainly that would be some good news for stability, but a lot of it's out there, but you cannot go wrong buying platinum or palladium long term. And as we talked about, platinum was number 1 last year of the 4 major metals, and palladium was number 2, and silver 3, and gold 4. But the difference between gold at 7.3% and platinum at 9.7% was a little less than 2.5%. So it's still worth something. But as I've said to investors on the phone, I like about 15% of your metals. If someone had $50,000 in metals, you may put $7,500 of the $50,000 in platinum and or palladium. And the other thing is important that you have both of them because they do function pretty close to each other in returns. But I do think it's important that you have some of it, because if the quantitative easing kicks in, I mean, platinum and palladium could really be huge winners over the next 2 or 3 years as money's being printed all over the world and inflation finally starts coming through with all the printing of money, and we don't go into a recession, then you could see platinum and palladium make some very large moves.
I want to conclude with some of your comments on Cyprus, because it really was all over the news this week. People were very concerned about whether it's coming to America. Are we going to see this type of bank robbery and bank heist hit banks in the United States of America or across Europe? And we've heard from the Eurozone, one of the Eurozone chiefs, that yes, Spain and Italy and Portugal, beware, because we're coming after your money as well. Do you believe that's you mentioned earlier that you think this might be a blueprint for the future. Should we expect to see this here even in America?
Jerry, I really believe so. I wouldn't say it if I didn't believe it. There's a lot of ways you can twist this thing, but Cyprus sits in a very important place geographically for time switches and banks transfers around the world, and I think the banksters are running a big test. I mean, that's what people that know a lot more about it than I do are saying. This is a test to see how citizens would react to banks that owe you money in interest, charging you and only giving you back a percentage of what you have on deposit with them. And I do think it's a test because they do know there's no way out of a world banking collapse coming. The only thing we don't know is when that will be. We don't know how long until that. And the Cyprus, while there has been some small riots in the streets, it's been nothing like what it should have been or could have been. Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, who wrote Reaganomics, I've had the privilege of speaking with him at 2 conferences, said this week on King World News that they should be out screaming, and citizens from all over Europe ought to join the Cyprus community because they're the ones it's going to come to next. And you've listed the countries right perfectly, Italy and Portugal and Spain and Ireland, and all those countries have to worry about that. And then if Americans don't get the picture when it is come from Greece and they wait a year and a half and now they're going to Cyprus, that the time frame for the next one will not be a year and a half. It will be a lot quicker. And all the listeners need to know when they see Spain or Portugal or Italy or Ireland have this, you better start thinking about your own money that you have on deposit. Because once again, the FDIC has a very small percentage assets to cover the amount of deposits in this country. So it doesn't become that you take your money out, because, to make money, you take it out for safety. And I'm not talking about closing your accounts. You're going to keep enough in to run your household. But access money, you're just not going to leave laying around and take that chance. And if somebody says, oh, you're just paranoid, no, I'm not paranoid. I've worked 35 years to make that money. I'm not going to have some bankster take it from me because of all the mistakes they've made.
Very good point. And you almost have to kind of think about it in these terms, that you pay to play. If you're actually going to believe in this paper debt system, this paper fiat global experiment that we're living in, and you're willing to put all your money in and let the banksters have great exposure to it, you might lose it. So I think the way that you're approaching it, the way you're saying that you're keeping much of your money out of the banking system, in many ways is really one of the best ways forward. And people can actually buy physical gold and silver. I bet you the people living in Cyprus who own their wealth in physical forms like gold and silver and palladium and platinum are very, very happy that they did that right about now. So how can people do that? How do you sell this? Coins, bars, how does it all work?
Yeah, coins and bars, and we carry about 40 different products, about 15 gold products and 12 silver products, and then platinum, palladium products, bars and gold, and we're putting out specials all the time. If listeners have not signed up for my free email that is kept confidential, and we put out specials and economic news, they could go to ftmdaily.com and hit the precious metals button and sign up, and we'll put you on our free email blast. And if you need to call me and ask me questions about any particular thing to do with gold and silver, platinum, or palladium, I can be reached at 800-247-2812, 800-247-2812.
All right, Tom, thank you so much, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week.
All right, Jerry, always a pleasure.
Gold, silver, palladium. If you have questions about or are looking to purchase precious metals, there is one name to know and one name to call. Tom Cloud at 1-800-247-2812. You hear Tom every week on Follow the Money Weekly, and gold and silver are an excellent hedge against inflation. Tom Cloud has over 30 years' experience as a precious metals advisor. Don't buy your precious metals through a call center and pay inflated prices. Call Tom Cloud, 1-800-247-2812. And for a limited time, tell Tom you heard it from Jerry Robinson on Follow the Money Weekly and receive free shipping and insurance on your order. That's right. Mention Follow the Money Weekly and your shipping and insurance charges are waived on your precious metals purchase. If you have a question about something you heard on the show, call Tom. And to secure your precious metals investment, call Tom. Your gold guy, Tom Cloud. 1-800-247-2812. That's 1-800-247-2812. You heard it on Follow the Money Weekly.
Jay Peroni, Certified Financial Planner, here with the idea of the week. This week we'll take a look at the growing need for healthcare being a universal growth theme around the globe. The all-weather portfolio strategy was designed to help investors get more consistent returns. I look for high-quality, low-volatility investments in an effort to see fewer ups and downs than the overall market. One of the ways I accomplish this is through combining various asset classes like dividend-paying stocks, currencies, commodities, precious metals, bonds, and other hedging vehicles. For the past 5 years, the strategy's worked really well. Since 2009, the strategy's up over 134% as of March 28th. That works out to 31.5% per year. One of my favorite tasks is looking for defensive stocks that can weather the ups and downs that come our way. I especially like the healthcare sector because there's always a need for quality medicine and medical care no matter what the economy's doing. The growing need for healthcare is a universal theme around the globe for a number of reasons. First, we have the aging population in developing countries are going to need access to more healthcare. Secondly, as emerging markets adopt modern medical practices, their consumption of healthcare will increase. And thirdly, growing global utilization may benefit providers of low-cost, high-volume healthcare products that will be demanded in both developed and developing countries. In the healthcare sector, one of my favorite all-weather stocks is a company called Covidien, ticker symbol COV. It pays a 1.4% dividend, and it's up nearly 50% since I bought it in December of 2011. However, I believe its best days are still to come. Covidien is engaged in the development, manufacture, and sale of healthcare products for use in clinical and home settings. It operates its businesses through three segments: medical devices, pharmaceuticals, and medical supplies. Here are a few reasons that I love this stock. Covidian's latest product launches have the potential to become strong contributors to its top line. I'm really excited about the prospects of the firm's new wireless energy device, which was launched in 2012. That should help improve its results. Additionally, Covidian is launching a study in treating type 2 diabetes in patients with a body mass index less than 35. If these studies produce positive results, the potential patient pool could increase by almost 5 million people. Finally, emerging markets offer sizable and rather unpenetrated marketplace for the company. It's launching a number of products designed specifically for the emerging markets, which should give the company an opportunity to position itself as a top medical instruments player in these attractive markets. Covidian is a good buy up to $75 a share. My 12 to 18-month price target is $100, representing about a 50% rise from its current price. Again, that's Covidian PLC, ticker symbol COV, worth a closer look. This is Jay Peroni, Certified Financial Planner, signing off for the Idea of the Week. We'll see you again next week.
All right. Well, Jay Peroni is a CFP, Certified Financial Planner, a member of our Christian Financial Advisor Network, and he also manages our very own PACE investment portfolio. If you would like to have a free 30-minute review of your investments with Jay, you can call him at 888-664-6963. That's 888-664-6963. And when you do, be sure to tell him you heard about him on Follow the Money Weekly Radio.
All right, where's my money?
Money.
Daily bread. Follow the Money Weekly presents the Retirement Minute.
The hot topic that people are asking me about lately is, should I contribute to my 401k plan at work? My answer is yes, unless you absolutely cannot afford to set aside any dollars whatsoever. You should contribute to your employer's 401k plan. A 401k plan is one of the most powerful tools you can use to save for your retirement. The first benefit is that your contributions to a 401k plan are not taxed as current income. They come right off the top of your salary before taxes are withheld. This reduces your taxable income, allowing you to pay less in taxes each year. You'll eventually pay taxes on amounts contributed when you withdraw money from the plan, but you may be in a lower tax bracket by then. You may even qualify for a partial tax credit for amounts contributed. Furthermore, money held in a 401k plan grows tax deferred. The investment earnings on plan assets are not taxed as long as they remain inside the plan. Only when you withdraw those earnings will you pay taxes on them, again, possibly at a lower rate. In the meantime, tax-deferred growth gives you the opportunity to build a substantial 401k balance over the long term, depending on investment performance. If you're lucky, your employer will match your contributions up to a certain level. You typically become vested in your employer's contributions and related earnings through years of service. The details depend on the plan. Employer contributions are also pre-tax and are basically free money once you're vested, so you should try to take full advantage of them. If you fail to make contributions and receive no match, you are actually walking away from free money your employer is offering to you. Another beneficial feature that many 401k plans offer is the ability to borrow against your vested balance at a reasonable interest rate. You can use a plan loan to pay off high interest debts or meet other large expenses like the purchase of a car. You typically won't be taxed or penalized on amounts you borrow as long as the loan is repaid within 5 years. Immediate repayment may be required, however, if you leave your employer. Loan payments are deducted from your paycheck with after-tax dollars. Finally, 401ks are a very convenient and reliable way to save. You decide what percentage of your salary to contribute up to allowable limits. Your contributions are deducted automatically from your salary each pay period. Because the money never passes through your hands, there's no temptation to spend it or skip a contribution here and there. Most plans allow for contributions as small as 1% of your paycheck. I have noticed many employers now offer you the ability to make after-tax or Roth contributions to your 401k plan. Because your Roth contributions are after tax, those contributions are always tax-free when paid out to you. But the main attraction of Roth 401k contributions is that the earnings on your contributions are also tax-free if your distribution is qualified. In general, a distribution is qualified if it is made more than 5 years after the year you make your first 401k contribution, and you are either 59.5 or disabled when you receive the payment. So check with your plan administrator to see if you have the ability to contribute to a Roth 401k. So make sure you have your financial affairs in order, and a good way to start this process would be to contact me through the Christian Financial Advisors Network by email at John, that's JOHN, at CFAnetwork.org. Or you can call me toll-free at 888-914-9909. I would be more than happy to review your financial situation with you to make sure your financial house is in order. And thank you for joining me this week for your Retirement Minute.
Are you tired of getting whiplash from the stock market? Is the return of your money more important than getting a return on your money? In these difficult economic times, it's only natural to seek out wise investing counsel. Thanks to a new service called the All-Weather Portfolio Strategy, you'll get real-time access to our service, which only invests in high-quality companies with historically low volatility. Have you ever been caught in the rain without an umbrella or left the house without sunscreen on a hot and humid day? Sometimes the weather catches us by surprise. Just like the weather, the investment markets can also catch us by surprise, and sometimes without warning. There are times when the markets soar and we miss out on gains, or maybe we have too much in the market and suffer a major decline during volatile times. That's why we created the All-Weather Portfolio Strategy. The All-Weather Portfolio is suitable for cautious investors, those with a time horizon of 5 to 7 years, those who are close to or in retirement. The goal of the All-Weather Portfolio is to protect against losses in a down market while still taking advantage of the markets when they rise. With the All-Weather Portfolio service, you'll get 24 hours, 7 day a week real-time access to the portfolio. You receive instant buy and sell alerts directly in your email inbox. You'll also get a special 27-page report entitled An Introduction to High-Quality, Low-Volatility Investing, a $47 value. To learn more about the All-Weather Portfolio, go to wallstreetrenegade.com/all-weather. Again, that's wallstreetrenegade.com/all-weather.
Welcome back to Follow the Money Weekly Radio. I'm your co-host, Jennifer Robinson, here with your host, Jerry Robinson. And we are also on the web at www.ftmdaily.com. That's followthemoneydaily.com. We have some listener questions that we would like to get to this week. And the first one comes from Anthony in Long Island, New York. Anthony says, on your show, you talk quite a bit about real estate investing. Due to all the artificial stimulus, housing is currently experiencing a rise in prices. What effect will rising interest rates have on housing prices when combined with the release of shadow inventories and a stagnant employment rate? My wife and I love your show. Thank you.
All right, Anthony, good question. Housing prices and investor demand are going to go down. They're going to go down whenever interest rates begin creeping back up. And what's going to cause interest rates to go creeping back up is a number of things. I mean, there's so many different black swans that could occur. But for the most part, we know the most predictable things are a further downward spiral of our credit rating here in the United States, causing interest rates to go up. Could be the dollar continues to go down. Could be a number of things that cause it. But regardless, we know that interest rates have to go up, Anthony. So you're right. And also there are some shadow inventories. There's people who are sitting on their properties and they're waiting for the right time to bring out their houses. In fact, I expect to see quite a bit of new inventory move onto the market this year as people think, oh, okay, everything's better now. And then you'll see a flood of inventory and then it'll turn right back into a buyer's market. That could happen. I'm not making a prediction. I don't know. But regardless, rental real estate to me, whenever I invest in rental real estate, I don't view it as day trading, for example. I don't view it as I'm going to buy this house and I'm going to flip it and make a bunch of money. Capital gains to me with real estate is not necessarily bygone era, but right now that's not the reason to buy real estate. The number one reason to buy real estate right now is because of the tax benefits that can change, as we've talked about before, but also because of the cash flow. Cash flow is king whenever you are in the middle of an economic crisis. So we like the cash flow that rental real estate provides us and the tax benefits. But again, you're right in questioning the future of real estate prices. The Federal Reserve's maniacal policies have driven prices of homes back up into, not where we've seen them before in the past back in 2006, but they're beginning to creep back up. And we know that the Federal Reserve wants to see that happen. But this is why I'm investing in areas that have not experienced the boom-bust cycle. Some of the areas that I like, many of you know I am investing here in Arkansas. I also like the state of Texas, Oklahoma, some portions of Kansas. These are areas, in fact, you know what? That's where Rich Dad, Poor Dad author Robert Kiyosaki, friend of the show and good friend of ours, that's where he invests. If you've ever, when I talked to him off the air, I mean, the majority of his properties, and I think he even said it on the program, but are in Dallas and Houston and Tulsa, Oklahoma City. I mean, he's in this area, and also North Dakota. I don't know if he's there, but I know a few other people are there because of the natural gas shale boom that's going on up there. Anyway, long story short, rental real estate is good, but you have to be careful where you buy. And remember, you're not buying it for the capital gains. If that happens, that's icing on the cake. You're buying it for tax benefits and cash flow. So I hope that helps, Anthony. Right.
And you always want to make sure if you're financing anything to keep that at a fixed rate, interest rate loan.
Always keep it on a fixed rate, because when interest rates do go up, inflation begins to go up. You do not want to be stuck in a adjustable rate mortgage that can really wipe you out.
Exactly. Now, we have another question that came in on the queue line, and this one is from Sally in New Jersey. We're going to go to that one right now.
Hello, this is Sally, and I'm from New Jersey, and I have a question for you. My question is this. I'm a single parent, and I make about, in alimony and child support, about $35,000 a year. I have about $100,000 in my savings. I'm unable to work, so my income is pretty much fixed because I have a child with a disability. My question to you is, I also don't have a home. I don't have any debt other than a student loan. And so right now I'm sharing a place with someone, which I would like to change, but I am unsure if I should buy a condo, a house, or a townhouse, or should I be buying gold, being that you guys are saying that the currency is going to go down and we're heading for a disaster. So I'm very confused, and I would like some advice on that area as to what to do with that money that I have in my bank, which is not earning any interest at all. I'm not a person that would invest in stocks. I don't believe that they're secure as they say it is. And so I was hoping if you guys can help me with that advice. Thank you so much. Bye.
So, Jerry, should someone on a fixed income like Sally, would it be best for her to go ahead and purchase a home, or, like she was saying, invest in gold? What do you think? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, it's a little tough whenever you're, dealing with somebody in this situation where you can't see all their financial information and all of this. And I always talk about how it's malpractice to dispense advice over AM radio as if you know the person. But I would say this, based upon everything that Sally said, what she really is talking about are kind of apples and oranges. Does she buy a home that she wants to live in and put her child in and, and raise? Or does she want to buy gold and hedge against the crisis to come? Now, I think you can probably make a case that you can do both. Very first thing I would ask Sally is, have you created a 6-month liquid savings account? And when we talk about that, we have that on our website, ftmdaily.com. You can go there and you can look at our 5 levels of financial freedom. The very first level involves creating a emergency pool of capital that eventually turns into a diversified 6-month liquid savings program. So you want 6 months. And now she said she makes $35,000 a year. So that's about $17,500 she needs in the bank and then diversified. Now, when I say in the bank, I don't mean literally taking it all and putting it in the bank. I mean having access to it. The way we like to do it, the way we've talked about it here over and over again, is the thirds approach. 33% in foreign stable currencies, 33% in gold and silver, precious metals, a final third in U.S. dollar denominated assets. That could be whole life insurance. It could be a CD, anything that's accessible, a money market fund, whatever the case might be. So I think the case is that she immediately needs to put some money to work that way to protect against inflation. And then the rest she could use to, yes, put a pretty large down payment on a home, although even on a fixed income of $35,000, I still wouldn't be chomping at the bit to pay the house off completely, because having some cash to be able to take advantage of an opportunity is very important, even in and above her $17,500.
Right. And I don't know the type of disability with the child. My heart goes out to you, by the way. As a new mother, I can only imagine what that must be like. But you don't know maybe what type of medical bills you are going to have in the next few to several years. And so I think having that liquid cash and not putting everything towards a house, it may be a wise move.
And that's a mistake sometimes that people make. It seems like a wonderful thing just to go ahead and pay off the whole house with cash, and but then you just trade the cash and now you have the house. But many times, and I know that feels good, and I know that makes sense in many ways, but a lot of times it doesn't make any economic sense. I remember when I was a financial advisor, I would sit down with people and I would, we would take this out 20, 30 years, 40 years, and we would look at the ramifications of paying off a house versus not paying off a house. And you know how often paying off the house factored in as a wise economic move? Almost never. So I'm very hesitant to tell people to pay off their house or take a big lump of cash and throw it at the house for a lot of reasons, but predominantly because it usually doesn't make the most economic sense. It may make you sleep better. It may make you feel better. It may make you feel good knowing that you don't owe anybody, and that oftentimes can be enough. But it doesn't always make the most economic sense. So I would urge you, Sally, if you don't already have a trusted Christian financial advisor or a faith-based advisor in your life, you can certainly go to our website, ftmdaily.com, and you can click on the button there for Find a Financial Advisor. We can put you in touch with someone for free, or just talk to somebody at your church or someone in your community and find a good, trusted financial advisor. Sit down, ask them these questions. That's what they get paid to do, and they'll be able to really kind of go through all your stuff and tell you exactly what the wisest move would be for you.
Yeah, and I would just like to add as a final note here is that Jerry and I both agree is that there is nothing wrong with renting. There are a lot of people out there who say renting is dumb. If you can help it, do not ever rent. You should own. And we don't agree with that at all. There are very many merits to owning a home, but there are also merits to renting. Maybe you don't plan on being in the area forever, or maybe don't have a steady or sure cash flow for a 30-year mortgage. Whatever the case might be, we don't necessarily disagree with renting in some cases.
Not at all. And in fact, you would be surprised at some of the wealthy people who rent, who don't actually own a home. In fact, I remember when we were talking with Peter Schiff, he was on the program. He rents, he doesn't own. And so it's kind of interesting. I mean, there's a lot of people who say, look, I don't know why I need to be in debt to a bank to have a place to live. I just want a place to live. And I don't want to have to deal with the maintenance and all of that. I'm not saying that renting is the best thing to do by any means, but what we are saying is that renting is not necessarily the worst thing that you can do. In fact, it frees you up, especially in this free agent economy that we're in. If you lose your job and you're in a tough economic environment where you live, being able to get up and leave really quickly is really nice. And when you're a renter, you can do things like that. When you are locked into a house and a mortgage, you know what mortgage means? It comes from the Latin combination, a kind of a compound word in Latin, mort, coming from the word for death, mortal, mortality, death, and then gage, G-A-G-E, that comes from the Latin word meaning grip, to hold on to something. So in reality, what is your mortgage? It's a death grip. It's a death grip on you. So I'm not a big fan of mortgages, as a way of doing things for everyone. But I think for the right person, owning a home can be great. And for the right person, renting is certainly the best thing to do. So very good point.
Well, I hope that answers the listeners' questions this week. If you would like to have your question answered on the air, please give us a call. The number is 800-609-5530. Press option 3. Be sure to leave your name and your town, and we would love to play that on the air here like we played Sally's question. And you can also send us an email, info@ftmdaily.com.
All right, friends. Well, that brings us to the end of our program. Thank you so much for choosing to allow me into your life each and every week. It is an honor and a privilege to be a part of yours as well. And as always, I leave you with this final word, this time spoken by the man himself, Jesus Christ, when he said, "Seek ye first the kingdom of God and his righteousness, and everything that you need will be added to you." Just something to think about. Remember, friends, when you want the truth about the global economy, just follow the money. Have a safe and prosperous weekend. I'll see you right back here next weekend. God bless.
The views and opinions expressed by the guests on Follow the Money Weekly do not necessarily represent the views of FTMDaily.com or Makers Group Financial, LLC. Even though these are proven strategies, Jerry Robinson is not a financial advisor, and his guests are not legal or tax advisors. You should always consult a trained financial advisor and or tax advisor before making any financial decisions. John Burrs is a registered representative of and does offer securities through Sycor Securities Incorporated. Lifetime Decisions Management Incorporated is not a subsidiary of nor controlled by Sycor Securities Incorporated.